So I've said before in the past, I'm quite a big fan of games like Dark Souls. I think one of the first quick plays I made was a Dark Souls-like game, but it was more roguelike, so it had different areas going through. However, I'm always interested in the idea of a game that basically wants to be Dark Souls, but maybe tone it back a bit. And Ashen was a game that I kept seeing on the Epic Store, but obviously I didn't really want to pay the money it was asking for, because it was a new game, it was in early access, and I wasn't really keen on the price. However, on the Xbox, if you had the Xbox Game Pass, it was actually included on the Xbox One. So I ended up downloading it and giving it a go. And honestly, Ashen is a very good game. Now, I picked it up on Steam recently because it's finally had the 1-year lease from Epic and it's come to other platforms, and I bought it for me and my friend. And honestly, if you like Dark Souls, more specifically something like Dark Souls 3, then Ashen is a perfect game to look into. It's kind of like a light version of Dark Souls, so while there's a lot of aspects that are similar to Dark Souls, it's not as terrifying as Dark Souls in the sense of it doesn't punish you as much. There's no invasions, there's no bullshit deaths. It's more, it's weird to explain. So a game I would compare it to is a game obviously like Dark Souls, but then it uses some features from a game called Journey, which for anyone who doesn't know, Journey was a PS3 title which was quite phenomenal at the time because there wasn't any real challenge to it. It was an exploration game, but you saw a ton of players in it who were also playing the game at the same time if they were online with PlayStation, and that kind of concept is a really interesting concept because for a while you don't really know if they're human or AI. Now, Ashen has that kind of system. However, you can't really do what you do in Dark Souls, you can't summon people, but instead you can basically just walk around, go to a certain area, and eventually either an AI or another player disguised as an AI will come in and help you. Now, being that I wanted to play as co-op originally, I couldn't, because we didn't know how to get it to work. You'd put in a friend code, like you'd put in a couple of digits so you'd have a private section, and then you've got to hope for the best that you're both at the same point in the game, otherwise it would split off and you wouldn't be able to help them, which is fine. I guess it's kind of a charm to the game, but I kind of wish it had a normal legacy co-op system where you could just invite them in. So what Ashen is about really is the world has basically started anew. It's like a world before it has expired or died and the world starting again. However, the Ashen, which is this kind of entity or power, I'm not 100% sure, I've never actually beaten the game, but it's a quite important artifact, let's say, and people want this artifact because they have it and they can rule and shape the world how they see fit. People who've had it before have either been really good or really corrupt, and someone who's still alive from the previous world basically says, yeah, if you don't get it, you're just going to go into a bit of a hellhole situation and it's going to be terrible. And people who are from that world are dying, like himself and another person you meet later on. So your quest is basically something like, it's kind of like a Breath of the Wild situation. You need to go to these locations, do certain stuff like go through dungeons, and then make your way towards the Ashen, stopping anyone else who wants to get it. It's very basic when it comes to the plot and the lore. Like, it's not in your face and there's not like 100 different items around the map which go, hey, if you read this you'll get the true ending like in Bloodborne. But there's enough there to keep you interested, and I quite like the direction it's gone. There's something about the whole, I mean, it's like Mass Effect really. I like it when a story's like, hey, the world has just started anew, you have a chance to fix things. If you fail, someone else is going to take that opportunity and completely ruin it. So, while you could argue that, yeah, you don't know if this is the right choice, you have that opportunity to make the choice. Couldn't tell you if there's like some twist at the end if someone betrays you or anything, I honestly don't know. But I quite like as well how with this game, unlike Dark Souls where you get quests which aren't really quests, they're just kind of like if you talk to someone at the right point, it then progresses their story onwards. Like in Dark Souls 2, there's a woman you can speak to who doesn't really know she's dying, but she is, and you keep seeing her throughout. But in Ashen, you actually have quest lines, so everybody has a story to tell. One of the first people you find, for example, has a brother and a father who were trying to find a cure for this curse that the family has on the bloodline, and they die in the process. Now, he's the last remaining member of the family, and he wants to get rid of this curse, so you end up helping him, and in return, anybody you help in a quest will then come with you on an adventure, and they'll pop in and out of the game as a kind of companion, similar to how Journey would work with seeing other people around the game. And I think that's really fun. I like how the game goes from, instead of, oh, you can summon everyone here and there, you only have them at specific points, and while I said earlier I do want a legacy co-op system, I would have liked that still to be a thing, but probably just for the AI, maybe make them a little bit weaker, although in saying that the AI is pretty stupid anyway, so it's not really going to do much difference. But there's something about this game which really just pleases me for some odd reason. I can't tell you if it's just because it's an easier Dark Souls or that it's just the simplistic art style, because I'll be honest, I'm a pretty simple guy. I like these kind of games with these kind of art styles. There's something really attractive about a blank face, as weird as that sounds. It's done in such a way that it looks more interesting than like hyper-realistic graphics or something ridiculously cartoony. But with Ashen it hits a nice little spot. Now the game's not perfect, I can tell you that immediately. Weapon selection is a bit naff in the sense of it's very restrictive. You have a one-handed weapon and a two-handed weapon. However, most of them seem to be axes or hammers. I haven't really seen a proper sword, kind of like a little bit more in depth. Similar to, again, obviously we're going to compare it a lot to Dark Souls. Dark Souls has stuff like you can have different builds, you can dual wield axes, you can have magic. There's no magic in this game. You get artifacts which will boost your character, and then you've got these like talismans which give you certain effects. I think the one I've got at the moment is if you do so many attacks in a row without taking damage, you get these little orbs and they do a ton of damage to the enemy. And then obviously if you get hit, it resets. And while that's a nice change, it does restrict the kind of gameplay you can experiment with. You're always going to have either a mallet or an axe. Now, you could obviously use the two-handed weapons, but obviously they're a lot slower and do more hits. And that's about as far as it goes. You get shields, and you get, instead of a torch, you get like a lantern, which you can put on the floor, which is cool. But besides that, it's just the same swing with right bumper and right trigger. Hold down the right trigger, and you can do a harder hit. And yeah, it kind of just becomes the same thing throughout the game, and the weapon upgrade system is really weird. I think it's less than Dark Souls in the sense of how many times you can upgrade, but when you upgrade a weapon, you never know if the new weapon you're picking up is better than what you got currently. So you kind of go into a silo effect of, I'm sticking with this axe, this is my axe now. I don't want that hammer, which could be better if I upgraded it. I want this axe. And I think I ended up using an axe from the start of the game for about 3 or 4 hours. One thing I do want to point out as well is the soundtrack in this game is absolutely phenomenal. I like it when a game goes for more atmospheric music rather than, what's the word for it? Kind of like adrenaline music where it gets you into the mood. With Ashen's soundtrack, it's more, yeah, it gets you into the mood, but it more immerses you into the game itself, in the environment, not more, oh, this is a boss coming up, let's get the blood pumping. It's more, I'm in this world, this is honestly quite relaxing, because obviously it's a new world, there's not a lot going on, but there's enough there to kind of keep you wrapped in it. So when you're going through a dungeon, when you're walking through the plains and you're going to find these new camps, you always feel like you're part of the adventure, not just this epic hero on a quest. You feel more in sync with your character, who, yes, you do get to, you know, create them at the start, but the character creation in this game is very restrictive because of the blank face. And I think that's something about this game not many people really understand and take away, which is, I feel like Ashen's more about the journey rather than the combat. So it's more of like an experience game like Sea of Solitude or Everyone's Gone to Rapture. It's more about taking in what's surrounding you and fitting into the world rather than fighting all these wacky bosses, which, let's be fair, in Dark Souls, that's one of the main things about it, is ridiculously hard bosses, some disturbing like designs, and then obviously the lore, which is heavily put into the items. Ashen, I would say, is a light version of Dark Souls, so if you're a very hardcore Dark Souls fan, this might put you off. But I'd say if you like Dark Souls and you want something that you can just play casually, which sounds weird for a Dark Souls-like game, then I would definitely recommend Ashen. It's a lot of fun. I've played through the majority of it on my Xbox. I'm going through it on my PC now. I might review this game in the future, in fact, because the Dark Souls concept is kind of like Left 4 Dead for me, where in the sense of it's nothing original, it's been done before, but the game themselves made this a formula that everyone wants to copy. Because with Left 4 Dead you've got stuff like, obviously, Payday, and with Dark Souls you've got stuff like Ashen, Jedi Fallen Order, Neo. There's something about the formula of these kind of games that, while I'm shit at Dark Souls, I'm absolutely dreadful, I can't beat it on my own. Something about the combat and just how the game works really drags me in, and once I found out Ashen was a Souls-like game from when I looked into like the game's description. And even they say on the store page it's incredibly faithful, which I would argue it is. There's something about that just really grabbed my attention and it really dragged me in, and I couldn't stop wanting to play it. But unfortunately, when I went to play it, I went on holiday. So I kind of forgot about it when I came back after a week, so I went to do other stuff. But then obviously it came out on Steam, so I thought, you know, I'll pick it up, I'll buy it this time instead of using the Game Pass and play through it again. And so far, while I've had the hitch here and there with like a couple of bugs, PC port is really good. So if you like Dark Souls and you want something new, I'd recommend Ashen in a heartbeat. I'm quite a fan of Rareware. And I liked their old stuff. I like Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, Conker and all that stuff. And one of the games that came out in the recent years was from Playtonic, which was obviously the people who made those games, which was Yooka Laylee. Now I backed Yooka Laylee. I will proudly admit that. I'm still happy with my purchase, although it wasn't the best thing in the world. I think A Hat in Time would have been a better input. But Playtonic are very good at recreating what they created years ago on like a modern engine. Now, when I originally saw that they had announced a new game, which was Yooka Laylee the Impossible Lair, I was kind of 50-50 with it, and I think one of my friends put it better, which was they kind of wanted another proper 3D one, taking improvements that were suggested from the previous game. But it's kind of obvious that what they were going for with this one was they were trying to bring back the nostalgia of Donkey Kong Country. And to my surprise, I think Yooka Laylee the Impossible Lair is better than Yooka Laylee. Not because it's a 2.5D platformer, which is more like older stuff which I'm used to, but there's just something about it that's done so much better. Now originally I played this when I went on holiday. I had it on my Switch and just played it on a train journey, and I didn't really get much of a feel for it. I did a few levels, but I really enjoyed what I played of it and I didn't really come back to it. Then Team 17 gave me a Steam key for some odd reason, and I basically played through it again on Steam. I haven't completed it. This is quite a rushed one, honestly, because there was something else that was meant to come this month, but I ran out of time. But from what I've played of it, it feels really good, and it's much better than Yooka Laylee. If you weren't a fan of Yooka Laylee, like control-wise, or just how the game was, I want to say how it was paced, because it had a really weird pacing, especially with that quiz level section. The Impossible Lair does things so much better. So basically the plot is, you start at the end of the game. Yooka Laylee have just appeared at this place, there's a queen who needs your help, and the bee guy, I cannot remember his name for the life of me, it's going to come back in my head later on. He's basically taken over and he's already winning. Now you can possibly beat the boss at the start of the game, similar to what Devil May Cry 5 does, but the game is meant to be really hard at the start because you don't have enough to back you. You need to free all these bees basically and just, well, yeah, save the bees and then they'll help you in the final boss. But the game pushes this idea of you can do a couple of levels, try it again, or you can beat the entire game and then come back to it. And I think, you know, I like that concept in a way. Like you're starting from the end, but it's not like this is what happened a few years ago. It's more, you're in the moment. You could try and do it now, but you have no idea what to expect because obviously you're new to the game. That's kind of the idea it's trying to push. You're new to something, but you can be cocky enough to try and beat it. Obviously, I'm not a good gamer. I'm pretty bad at these kind of games sometimes, so I had to obviously go through the game and play it to try and beat it. And from what I've played, this is basically just Donkey Kong Country with new graphics and obviously new characters. It's Donkey Kong Country. What more can I say? It's an incredibly fun game. Animations are really nice, the humour's on point. I think it's actually better humour than Yooka Laylee, funnily enough. There were some of the jokes in that which just felt really weird. The text dialogue isn't slow as well, which is always a major plus. But when playing through this, there was a bit of nostalgia in a sense, because obviously one of my favourite games when I was a kid on the Super Nintendo was Donkey Kong Country. Now it's not as, I wouldn't say it's as pretty as Donkey Kong Country, because the way they did the art style then was something that just stood the test of time somehow. And I personally think that Yooka Laylee the Impossible Lair will look a bit dated after a few years. I like the blend of when you go through the levels it's 2.5D and then when you go to the hub world it's like a top-down view. So you get nice different perspectives of the world. Again, the humour is on point. I think it's more amusing. Like, one of the first things you get is a paywall. Like an in-game paywall. It breaks the fourth wall in a sense, but it is just there like to say, hey, you need to beat these levels prior and get these coins, which are quite important to pick up throughout the level, just so you can keep progressing. So you can get as far as you want, and then if you haven't got the coins, you have to obviously go back, or you can go back to the start and try and fight the boss again. I honestly don't have a lot to say about this game because it's more, if you play it, you'll have fun. It's actually a surprisingly good Switch port. I think it's at 60 FPS both docked and undocked, and it still looks really good. PC obviously is going to look the best out of the bunch. I imagine it's going to be the same on PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, where it just looks really good and feels really well. Controls are tight and responsive. You can do stuff like roll off and then jump midway to try and get to further ledges. I imagine this is going to be a fun game to speedrun. Yeah, honestly, I haven't got much else to say. You can get tonics, which are like modifiers for the levels, which will either increase or decrease how much a feather is valued at when you pick it up. The pages take a backseat in this one. They're still there and they give you like little challenges to do to open up parts of the world, but they're not the main focus this time. Like in Yooka Laylee, pages were the pages were the jiggies of Yooka Laylee. In this, it's more you have to break this jar and save a bee, and all of the bees have stupid names. There's probably a lot of them that are bee puns. The person who wrote this must have got sick of bee puns by the end of it, and I think that's quite amusing. But yeah, if you want to find a game which is probably on sale for Christmas, Yooka Laylee The Impossible Lair is pretty fun. Thank you Team 17 for, giving me a key for it. I'm quite grateful because I do quite like Platonic. While I think they keep hold of the past a bit too much, they're certainly trying to push themselves a bit to go, hey, we're still the old crew. So we know what we made was good in the past, but we're trying to modernise it. And I think with The Impossible Lair of Yooka Laylee, The Impossible Lair does a better job of bringing back that nostalgia while still trying to make it feel modern. Personally, I would like to see them make another attempt of a proper 3D Yooka Laylee game. Maybe not make the worlds as big as they were in the previous one, but I think the team is definitely on the right direction. They've obviously improved since the previous game, so if you were put off by Yooka Laylee but still like the art style and obviously the world, you might like Impossible Lair more than you think. That's just a suggestion. So who here remembers my quick play series? Where I'd play a game for a couple of hours, try to do a first impressions review kind of format for it, and then whenever I did one, my review knowledge would just go out the window and I'd forget to actually make normal videos, which is why off script became a thing, because man, quick plays really ruined my energy and inspiration to make content for some odd reason. But one of the games I really desperately wanted to talk about was Hades. Now, Hades was originally an Epic exclusive, and it was the only game that really pushed me to buy games on that platform. And when I decided to uninstall my Epic launcher, because I frankly don't like Epic, this is the only game I missed from my library. Now, I bought two games. I bought that and World War Z, and World War Z was good, but it was, pretty underwhelming. Hades, however, was an early access title, and I've watched it from the start to probably 6 months prior to this video, and the development was absolutely phenomenal. I think it's Supergiant Games, the people who made Bastion, are working on this, and obviously they keep very safe with how they do their games. They always go for like the top-down kind of gameplay. But Hades, while it's a roguelike, which is something I'm not entirely keen on, is such a fun game. Now, I haven't played this for a few months, so I had missed about 6 months of content. And I come back into it when it comes on Steam because obviously I really love this game. Like, I cannot stress that enough. I love Hades. It's one of my favourite games of probably to come out in the last year or so. And I immediately got back into the hook of it. And while I've only got like an hour or two on Steam, I had about 40 odd hours prior to this. So I knew a bit about the game. And I played through it and I got to the new area which wasn't in it originally. And I got to the boss and that's when I died. But I couldn't tell you how much fun I had playing through it again. Hades is all about Greek mythology, which is something I'm not really, studied in. I don't really care about it. But it's you're playing as a god called Zagreus, whose father is Hades. Doesn't sound that accurate, but basically you are living in the underworld, and Zagreus doesn't feel comfortable there. He never felt like he belonged. And obviously wants to go against his father's will, which is once you live in the underworld, you cannot leave it. You can't go to visit anyone. You are isolated in this area. So the basic plot of the game is Zagreus is trying to go and leave the underworld to be with the other gods, basically. Hades noticed this and he tries to stop you, and he's not happy about it. But instead of like jailing you away, he gives you a fighting chance to try and escape. But if you die, you go back to the start, and hence the roguelike scenario. Throughout the game, you'll get help from different other gods, and they'll give you stuff like power-ups, passive effects, some super abilities. That was a recent thing, I believe. And you basically get an understanding of something is wrong with Zagreus' home, in the sense of something doesn't make sense or something doesn't add up. And you get little hints through the game, just basically saying, maybe Hades is hiding something from you, or maybe Zagreus found something out which you won't know yet, but it's going to be like a massive plot twist later on. And the entire concept is just, you keep trying to leave, and eventually you'll get there. Now, I don't know if the final area of the game is added yet, so I think if it's like when I played it before, you'd get to a certain point, it will then say, oh, somewhere later on Zagreus died and you've gone back to the start. That's their way of getting around it. But the game itself, well, again, I don't like roguelikes. I'm not a massive fan of it. I can play them, but I don't play them for long. There is something about Hades that just kept me interested, it kept me enjoying it, and I kept going through it. Firstly, the soundtrack is, again, the soundtrack in this game is just as good as Bastion, and it's really, it's just good. The best I can put it is it's a great soundtrack, and I mean, it's all on their YouTube page, you can just go listen to it. But there's other stuff like the characters you interact with, they're so well written, and it's really interesting because you can give them items later on which are like gifts, and you can then unlock stuff for them. So you can unlock bits of lore, you can then gain their trust, and they'll give you certain items which will be like modifiers for the main game. And you start to learn as well that the people you fight as bosses, well, you can speak to them outside in the hub world before you go on to do another run. Not all of them are against you, which is kind of interesting. Like, they don't like you that much because obviously you're trying to escape, and yeah, they have to go with Hades' like orders and they have to stop you. But then you talk to them outside of it, and they're quite humble and laid back, and you can obviously gift them stuff as well. It doesn't really make the boss any easier, that's still going to be the same, but you can then get stuff from them, so you can get their blessings and so on. But what I just like about this game is it's obviously, it's always new, because with roguelikes it's all meant to be randomly generated. The map layouts are pretty similar, but you have different choices every time to go through certain doors or certain boats, and the reward for that area will be different every time. So you can get money, you can get gems which are used for upgrades, and so on. But sometimes you'll get these random encounters, like you can either get someone who's trying to push a boulder, which you can talk to the boulder, might add, which is just brilliant on its own, make a friend with a rock. But then I think there's also, you can find the Reaper, like Death or something, and then have a couple of challenges with him. Some rooms, they're designed to stop you in your track, in the sense that they just spawn enemies constantly for a certain amount of time, and you can try and kill them, but if you do that, you're most likely going to die and have to go from the start. And the game is designed, obviously, to try and stop you from progressing, like to a point where if you beat a boss or something, I think if you get to the end of the run, you'll give yourself modifiers and that makes it harder for you. The game is all about like testing your patience and seeing how well you crack under pressure. And yeah, when you get to the later levels, they introduce some enemies that are ridiculously hard. Not in the sense of killing them, but they have certain abilities which just make it a bit more tedious. Look, there's one you can kill later on that becomes a ghost, and you have to kill that ghost, otherwise it will take another corpse which you've killed previously and then use that as a host, and then you have to go through the process again and again and again. And I really like that. I think there's a lot of charm behind this game when it comes to Hades, and I think that's something the devs do brilliantly with all their games. Bastion is one of my favourite games of all time, and Hades is becoming one of them as well. I just really like their style of game. They've got really good narrative. The artwork is fucking gorgeous as always. It's like a kind of, it's basically drawn artwork. It's, instead of 3D polygons, it's more kind of like old Resident Evil in this, like pre-rendered layouts. And then obviously your character is kind of drawn but also 3D to be animated at the same time. Now there's obviously a lot of this game I don't really know about yet because I've missed a lot. I believe there's weapon upgrades as well. But honestly, even in early access, this is a phenomenal game. I can't stop playing it, and I will play it constantly from time to time, and sometimes I'll just like, you know, I'm gonna have a quick game of Hades. I feel like I'm in the mood for like one quick run, and that run will last me about an hour, maybe longer. I decided I was gonna put this in for this month's off script because, again, I wanted to do this for months and I really wanted to talk about it. And, you know, when it comes out, I've early access, I'm going to review it. Like, hands down, that is a promise right now. Doesn't matter how long it will take me, I'm going to review this game because I really desperately want to. But I went, oh, you know, I'm going to get some, like, you know, passive gameplay, some basic gameplay. And this was my first run. The run you're seeing now, this is all one video. And basically, I just went into the game, I installed it, I bought it on Steam. This is the first time playing it after months. And I somehow got the furthest I've ever got in this game. And I just wanted about, what, 10-20 minutes of footage. And it ended up being a massive run where I'd done the boss, the first area, the Hydra, and got to the third boss and then died. You know, after what, I forgot I was recording, and I just kind of went, you know what, that was a really good run. Looked down to my bottom right, saw that it was still going, think, oh, bloody hell, this is more footage than I need. Yeah, I couldn't go any further than that. Hades is a really fun game. I would rather review it than point it in an off script, but just to, if you want something that's a roguelike, like Enter the Gungeon or something, but you want something with a bit more narrative to it, and some really, like, good, well, I'd say the humour's alright, some fantastic music, and really pretty art style, then yeah, Hades is a must-buy. If you're a fan of Bastion, then why haven't you picked up this game already then? I shouldn't have to say, if you've played Bastion, and you've seen this and thought, this looks alright, just buy it on impulse. Couldn't stress that enough. Hades is such a good game that I would put it on the same level as Bastion. I like Supergiant, I'm a massive fan of their work, but Bastion and Hades are probably the two games that I would say are a must play. Hades, even in early access, you're still getting more than what you're paying for.